Chapter 60. Sitting Wide. She only had to wait about 30 seconds before her mum's van, 2 police cars and 3 supercars came charging down the road. Amy recognised the supercars straight away. They were Taylor GT 500s, her dad's fastest design. All 3 were sparkling silver grey and sat so low to the ground to reduce wind speed. They were almost flat. Just as the chasing convoy reached the starting line, Amy pushed the direction lever, revving the engine. "You have reached your final destination," said the sat-nav again. "Apparently not," said Amy, and shot away. Immediately, the van, the police cars, and the supercars gave chase. Amy pumped the lever as hard as she could. The Turbochaser screamed, but it moved. Whoa, did it move. She had not been able, on the small country roads that they had driven on so far, to really push the engine and see how fast it could go. But now, on the wide racing track, she could. Oh my days! What is the actual acceleration on this? Amy found herself thinking, despite the situation, 0 to 60 in 3 seconds. But there was no time to indulge her inner petrol head. She had to concentrate. The rain seemed to have stopped almost as soon as it had started, but it had left the road wet and greasy. The Turbochaser was shuddering with the speed. Meanwhile, in front of her was the first turn on the track. It didn't just turn hard, it banked. It rose to one side on a steep diagonal. This meant she had to throw her weight to the one side. Otherwise she could feel, on the wet road, the whole machine would have gone into a skid. How did she know to do this? It just seemed to come to her naturally. Other people, however, did not know it. As Amy banked round the turn and shot off into the long straight, she just saw, out the corner of her rear-view mirror, DCI Bryant's car go into the very skid. "Ah!" shouted DCI Bryant as they went spinning round and round and round. "Turn the steering wheel the other way, sir," shouted PC Middleton. "Are you sure? Aren't you supposed to turn the steering wheel into a skid?" "Ah! What does that even mean?" "Do something, sir." "I'm trying." Bang! The ing of trying was lost as their car smashed into the side of a supercar driven by one of Peter Taylor's test drivers. Both cars now went into a spin and ended up on the side of the track, taking the other police car with them. But Amy didn't even see all that. She was speeding down the end of the straight and starting to bank in the other direction. She could see in her rear-view mirror the 2 remaining supercars hard on her heels. Even with all that going on in her head, she thought, they look amazing. So sleek and streamlined, like 2 leopards chasing a hyena. Then it occurred to her that, in this analogy, she was the hyena. The prey. Which made her push on the lever even harder. She felt the wheel shudder underneath her, and again the car shook round the corner. But, again, she shifted her weight and got it under control. The last bend before coming back to the starting line was what, on racing tracks, is called a hairpin, meaning it's shaped a bit like a hairpin, with a very sharp bend, and turning it at speed without crashing is very difficult. But Amy couldn't slow, because the supercars were gaining on her, so she didn't even brake. She just powered into the turn, going round as wide as possible, almost hitting the fence, but then pulling the car round at the last second and back onto the home straight. And then she saw, coming up, another problem. her mum's van, which Susie had sensibly, given that it was a van, top speed 53 miles per hour, acceleration 0 to 53 in about 6 minutes, decided not to enter into this race, but rather had left idle, sitting tight on the starting line, waiting for her daughter and the Turbochaser to come back around again. When I say sitting tight, what I actually mean is sitting wide. The van was parked across the starting line, blocking the way, and Susie, Sanjay, Prisha, Colin and Norma had got out and were standing on either side of it, holding hands, and their faces were set. Amy looked to the side to see if she could swerve past them, but going back onto the paved road from the facility. But the opening in the fence had led to the track had been shut. There was no way to go round, and the only way was forward. Amy looked at her. She swallowed. "This is your final destination," said the sat-nav again. "Please stop saying that," said Amy. Chapter 61. Baked bean flavoured crisps. The Turbochaser was heading directly either straight for the van or for one of the parents. It was a standoff, a game of chicken. And so far, none of the parents looked like they were going to chicken out. In a terrible moment, which she felt immediately bad about, it did cross Amy's mind to think, would anyone actually really miss Colin and Norma? And then she realised, yes, someone would. Janet. Amy carried on, heading directly towards them, hoping that at least one of the parents would break. Sanjay in particular didn't look too happy. His eyes were flashing towards Prisha in a very, "Are you sure about this?" kind of way. Amy could see her mum as well, though she appeared brave and steadfast, was also, from the look in her eye, pleading for Amy to just stop the car and give up. But she wasn't ready to do that. Not yet. And behind her, she could see the supercars, getting very close now. Then she noticed something. Colin and Norma had stopped holding hands, because Colin, it turned out, had another enormous packet of baked bean flavoured crisps, and had chosen his moment to stuff a few in his mouth. Both Amy's hands were gripped tight to the steering wheel. In a flash, she lifted her right hand off and reached over to press the button she needed. From the parents' point of view, the vehicle that was coming straight for them suddenly got much thinner and more like a rocket. All the wheels went into a single line, and the motorbike version of the Turbochaser swerved at the last minute, away from the van, and, with a whoosh, snaked through the small gap between Colin and Norma, created by Colin's need to eat crisps. "What happened there?" said Colin, looking up, munching. Chapter 62. Until she absolutely has to. On the other side of the starting line, the two supercars, unable to get past, had stopped. Susie walked over to speak to Peter. He took off his helmet. Said Peter. "This isn't as easy as I thought it would be." "No," said Susie. "Things often aren't as easy as you think they'll be." Peter stared at her. "What's that supposed to mean?" She stared back at him. "Well, Peter, I think you probably thought, after the accident, that the easiest way of dealing with your guilt about it was to leave your family and go and live miles away." He began. "I think you thought it was easier because that way you wouldn't have to confront or be confronted every day with your disabled daughter." Peter went very red and opened his mouth to speak. He looked extremely angry. "Or with me," said a voice. "And the fact that I was also pretty shaken up by the accident." They turned. It was Jack who had spoken. He looked nervous, but suddenly older, not so much like a stretched-out toddler, as if he'd suddenly become a little bit more of a man. Peter Taylor shook his head. Jack's interruption had cut off his anger. Perhaps because it was the first time Jack had said anything to him for some time. Now he looked more confused. "I can't believe that's what you think," he said. "It is what we think, Dad. It's what we all think. Well, except Amy, who probably does think it too, but wouldn't say it." "Yes, Peter," said Susie, "because she loves you too much." He opened his mouth again, but then he shut it. And for a second, just looked very, very sad. Susie sighed and put her hand on his shoulder. "Having said that, blaming each other is not helping, as it never does. It's not getting our daughter out of that vehicle and into a safe place." Peter nodded. He turned back to the track. "Well," he said, "I suppose we could just sit here and wait for her to come round again." Susie looked out at the Turbochaser going round. The first bend of the track once more. It had gone back to its usual shape. "No," she said. "Look." He looked. The Turbochaser was slowing down. It stopped about halfway round the track. "I thought she might do that," said Susie. "She'll just sit there now, until we chase her again." "Why?" Susie took a deep breath. "Because I know my daughter, and she's trying to show you something. She's trying to show you she can drive. She's not going to stop until she absolutely has to." Peter shook his head. "So, if you know her so much better than I do, Susie, what do you suggest?" Susie blinked. She looked round. "Isn't it obvious?" "Not to me. I'm going to take the van and the other parents off the track. I suggest you tell your other driver to get off too." Peter frowned. "Leaving just me and her?" "Yes, that's what she wants, to race you." Peter thought about it. He almost, for a second, seemed to smile. Then he said, "Okay. Okay, so I have a task for you. You've just listened to 3 chapters. Now in chapter 61, Janet's dad Colin was eating a giant bag of baked bean flavoured crisps. So my task for you today is to invent a brand new flavour of crisps. It could be any flavour you like, sweet or salty, or even both. So I'd like you to send us your ideas, because we'd love to see them. Good luck.